Shalom and welcome to Nazaree Israel and to the house of Joseph. And my, oh my, it's that time of year again. Should be a joyous, festive time of year, but we get a lot of cries for help and a lot of requests for understanding what's going on. We have several issues this year. This is probably the worst year that I've seen it. So we're going to talk all about it. So we are issuing a patch study on our Torah Calendar study. We're talking about a barley patch update, no pun intended. But what we need to talk about, the title says it all. We need to talk about why it's wrong to retroactively declare the Aviv barley, as if that wasn't obvious, but there's a lot of people that don't seem to understand that. We're also going to talk briefly about why what's called intercalation is the solution. Intercalation, that's a big word meaning lining up the head of the year, but not necessarily according to what's called the 7-species calendar. Now, we've got a lot of information to cover here. We're going to try our very best to do a responsible job, given the very limited amount of time that we have. This study is issued on the second day of the 12th month, 5786. And again, in another place, we'll talk about why that should actually be 6026, because Judah subtracted 240 years from the calendar in ancient times. So a Western Roman Christian Gregorian date would be 20 February 2026. Okay, and we're going to talk about a whole lot of stuff in this session, not necessarily in this order. Again, we have our barley patch update, no pun intended. We're going to read someone's cry for help. We get a lot of letters like this every year, asking for understanding, asking for teaching, clarification. Again, we're going to talk about why retroactively declaring the month of the Aviv is not biblical. It's not scriptural. Okay? We're going to talk about why intercalation, or lining up the year, is the solution, but not necessarily according to the what's called the 7-species model. Probably well intended, but we're going to talk about that. We don't have enough time to get into that completely. We hope to publish something more definitive later. We always have a question around this time of year about how many months there are in a year, because if you come from the Western Roman Gregorian Christian calendar tradition, there's 12 months in a year, and then sometimes you have a leap month. And in Hebrew, we have a leap year. We also have questions about how many months. Is it possible, hypothetically, to have an 11th month or a 14th month? We'll see why that's possible, although extremely rare. And we'll also have some updates with regards to the barley witnesses, not necessarily in that order. So we want to do a responsible job of this. It's a very, very sensitive subject, very touchy subject. My prayer is that Yahweh is going to use us, and to use this study to help our people come closer together, because every year it seems there's something. We have one barley witness, he's celebrating. He calls it the annual barley wars have begun. Yay! And oh my. That's not what we need. What we need is to come together in right order as a single people, keeping Yahweh's singular doctrine. So there's a lot of bad teaching out there. We're going to try to dispel at least some of it in this study. And may Yahweh please help us to put him first. May Yahweh please help us to put his doctrine first. May Yahweh please help us to behave like responsible adults. So, and one of the things I've always said is it doesn't matter if I'm right. So I'm actually going to reverse myself on some things in this video. It doesn't matter if I'm right. What matters is that we end up teaching what is right, that we end up teaching what Yahweh says is right in his sight and not necessarily in our own sight. So again, may Yahweh please help us to be mature and responsible adults here. If we have something to learn, we have something to learn. We're going to have to use some names here just because of the nature of things, but we want to do so in a responsible fashion. We want to use names only for clarity and for, hopefully, pray for it with me, reconciliation purposes. Because if we're his servants, we should all be working together to build his singular kingdom. And not all the preachers and teachers agree on that point, but that's our conviction and our belief. Okay. So people tell me they like the jokes. Back in 5777 or 2017, when the Sanhedrin had my computer hijacked and I was threatened and then summoned to the land of Israel to play the Mashiach ben Yosef role, uh, the then Nasi of the Orthodox Sanhedrin, Hillel Weiss, told me that the Sanhedrin wants to go back to the original calendar. And I'm thinking to myself, really? Have you seen the way things are in Ephraim every year, year by year? With the barley wars, we have some of the teachers are declaring the annual barley wars have begun. It's such a grief to the spirit. Uh, so I do think that Yahweh has shown us his proper answer, which is correct or proper intercalation. That's a big word meaning to line up the head of the year. We'll talk briefly about it. I don't have enough time to cover the whole subject. We're trying to get this study published before Shabbat. I've got to record it, send it to my editor. He's got to edit it and then upload it. So, and we hope to publish a fully revised study later. Also, we plan on rewriting the Torah Calendar study completely. Okay. So people ask, what's the big deal about the barley? Why do we care about first fruits of Aviv barley? Well, if you're new to the channel or you have not yet read the Torah Calendar study, uh, when we come to passages in the renewed covenant, such as Korinthim Bet or 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 20 and 23, Shaliach Shaul, the Apostle Paul, tells us that now Mashiach has been raised from the dead, and he has become the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. So there's a resurrection motif. He says, but each in his own order. First, Mashiach, the first fruits, and then at his coming, those who belong to him. And we know that everything in the Torah ultimately speaks of Mashiach. Okay, so people say, well, what's wrong with just keeping the Hillel to Jewish calendar? And we'll talk about that more in the Torah calendar study. Hopefully, we'll get more videos published on that in the future. But so what has happened is that you have in the Judah has done an amazing job of trying to preserve the original calendar, even when they were forced outside of the land of Israel. Now, one of the things that they did that we disagree with, they renamed the months. So in the Bible, you have the first month, second month, third month, fourth month. The first month is also called the month of the Aviv, not called the month named Aviv, but it's the month of the Aviv. But Judah's gone ahead and given all the months names, in particular Babylonian names. So they have Nisan, Ayar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, Elul, Tishrei, Heshvan, Kislev, Tevet, Shivat, and Adar, which is their 12th month. And then plus they have what they call an Adar Bet, which is a 13th month. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Basically, you can think of an Adar Bet like a second December. So if you had September, October, November, December, 2nd December, and then you come to January. That would be sort of a parallel if you were to find something analogous to the Western Roman Gregorian system. Okay, so talk about this just a little bit. People have questions like how many months are there? Okay, and why do you have 12 months and 13 months? Why does that happen? Okay, well, for those of us who are raised in the Western Roman Gregorian Christian calendar. So Gregorian, and there's more than one Christian calendar, but a Gregorian year, the Western Roman Christians, is 365 days long. And what they try to do is they try to keep it so that it works in a solar sense. So if you're an astronomer or an astrologer, those two used to be the same thing. You basically have 12 months, and hopefully everything lines up so where you're approximately near the same start point at the start of the calendar year. So all the celestial bodies are in the same alignment when you reach the start of a new year. Okay, so the way they've broken it down is they have 12 months. Most of the months have 30 or 31 days, of course, save February, which has 28, or any leap month, you have 29 days. So the big difference is Hebrew uses a totally different system. So Hebrew months are either 29 or 30 days by definition. So that's on average, if you do the math, it works out plus or minus to about 11 days less each year. Okay, well, if you do the math, you figure, okay, 11 days less. So after about 3 years, you've got around 33 days less. That's about a month. So every 3 years or so, just a little bit less than every 3 years, you need to add an extra month in order to keep the start of the year lined up or intercalated. So now that's the rough general understanding, but the real issue is not that you have 12 or 13 months. The real issue is that you line up the year so that you go from the barley to barley to barley. And the reason why we do that is because Yahweh has his year aligned to the agricultural harvests, and it needs to be lined up like that because you have the annual tithes originally, at least, were based on agricultural products. Of course, they're not limited to agricultural products. Today, you can tithe on anything, any form of income, any form of increase. But originally, Israel, of course, our forefathers, our ancestors, had to have the agricultural products. So you wanted to line up the feasts so that people were able to bring their offerings at the right time without messing up their harvests. And that's something we'll talk about in the next in future videos when we talk about what's wrong with the Karaite calendar and what's wrong with the barley searchers who use the equinox or the equilux as part of their system, because it just doesn't work. If you go by the equinox or the equilux, if you actually step it through, you will not be able to harvest your harvest. And we'll talk about that at another place. We'll also talk about that when we rewrite the Torah calendar study. Now, one of the things is that's so critical that we have learned just this last week is not only are you lining up with the very first of the Aviv barley, but there's also a requirement to line up with the first fruits of the wheat harvest, because the wheat first fruits are required for the Pentecost. We'll talk about that a little later. That's something we knew. The light bulb hadn't come on yet. It hadn't clicked. Now it has. So, okay, so how many months? People are always asking, okay, is this 12 or 13th months? Okay, I get that. But can you hypothetically have an 11-month long year, or can you hypothetically have a 14-month long year? And the hypothetical answer is hypothetically, yes, you can. It's very, very rare. Uh, I don't think I've ever seen it like that. But hypothetically, if you have, let's say you have a year where the barley comes late, and then the next year the barley comes early, you're obviously not going to get a full 12 or 13 months out of that. So you can hypothetically have an 11-month year. Or the reverse can also be true. Let's say you have a year where the barley comes early, and then the next harvest comes very late, you could hypothetically have a 14-month year. I don't believe I've ever seen it. If I recall correctly, I'm not remembering. I might remember an 11-month year, but I don't remember a 14-month year. In any case, it can hypothetically happen. And if it does happen, not to lose your mind over it, because as we move further and further into the end times, Yahweh is bringing stranger and stranger weather in order to get his people to turn back. And because humanity continues to devolve as we get further into the end times, it does seem possible with more and more freakish weather that we could hypothetically have an 11 or 14-month year. Don't lose your mind over it if it does happen. The main thing is to line up the head of the year properly so that the agricultural harvests can take place and the feasts can take place without interrupting the harvests so that people don't lose their crops or their livelihood. And again, we have to have the first fruits of the wheat harvest for Shavuot. Okay, one of the things we need to talk about, the reason for issuing this patch study so urgently is because of the issue of retroactive declarations of the Aviv. And there's two barley witnesses in particular that do this or like to do this, and it is wrong. So I'm going to try to name names only in a responsible way, but you as the viewer, you as the person who's responsible for what you believe, doing your due diligence, learning what the Bible has to say, you need to understand why these things are wrong. And it's very difficult out there because there's a lot of different voices, a lot of different ministries, and they're all claiming different things. So, how do you know? You have to study, you have to pray, you have to listen, but hopefully we can provide some clarity and some insight on the matter to make things easier to digest and to absorb. Okay. So, we're just going to talk through some potential scenarios to explain why retroactive declaration of the Aviv may seem like it works in the modern day for people with modern cars and planes, or for people who live in the land with a car, uh, people who have control over their own time schedules and all this kind of a thing, but why it absolutely wouldn't work in ancient times and why it won't work for most people, even in the modern day. So, okay, so as we head into this, so in the modern Hillel 2 Jewish calendar, they call the first month of the year the month of Aviv, meaning as a name. Okay, and in scripture, it's called the month of the Aviv. Okay, it's the first month of the year. It's the month in which the Aviv takes place. And Aviv, that just means that the barley has reached what's called a medium dough stage. And that's the youngest stage at which it will reliably germinate and sprout and lead to a full, healthy harvest. So that information comes from the only barley witness that we know who's qualified, and that would be Becca Bitterman. She lives there in the land of Israel. We'll talk more on her in a moment. So the month of Aviv, or month number one, is actually the way it's described in scripture. That would correspond in the Roman Gregorian calendar to the month of January. And so the first month of the year, month of January, that's called Aviv in the Jewish calendar, but the first month, or the month of the Aviv. Okay. Now, month number 12 in the Jewish Hillel 2 calendar is called the month of Adar. Okay, and you compare that to the Gregorian month of December. So, December being the 12th month, Adar being the 12th month in the Hillel 2 Jewish calendar. There you go. Okay, now in the Hillel 2 Jewish calendar, again, they need to have a 13th month every 3 years or so. So that's what they call an Adar Bet, or a second Adar. It's month 13. And if we were to come up with an analogy, you'd have a month of second December in the Gregorian calendar. Okay, so the question would then become, when you're waiting to line up the Aviv barley, you're trying to get the barley to line up so you can start your feast season, so you can start your calendar year. The question would be, do we see Aviv barley yet? So we know it's the month of the Aviv. We know it's the first month, the month in which the Aviv barley is presented in a wave sheaf, or is it not there yet? Meaning we need to declare a second December. Okay, so that's the difference. Okay, so in the Gregorian system, you're trying to make sure everything lines up astronomically in the sky. And the equinox people do that also. The lunar Sabbath people do that also. They're focused on the rotation of the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the heavenly bodies. But in Yahweh's system, you're more focused on what's here. It's more of an earthy model. You're focused on what's the state of the barley. Okay, so there you go. Okay, so now people want to know. All right, so there's a bunch of different leaders and teachers out there, a bunch of different barley search parties. Everyone's preaching and teaching a different thing. How can you know which one you should be following? Okay, or how can you know what are the standards? Okay, well, there's some fairly simple rules for declaring the Aviv barley, and there's some exceptions to the rules. We'll go into those hopefully another time. We're not going to have time in this particular presentation. But and Also, declaring the barley is a priesthood function. But that needs to be clear in people's minds. Most people in the Messianic world, they tend to look on organization and order as a negative thing. Some of the barley witnesses and some teachers and preachers in general, they tend to look upon organization as a bad thing. They tend to say organization is the church, even though Yahweh is an Elohim of order and not of disorder or confusion, as in all the assemblies of the saints. The reality is, we are effectively a spiritual army. And that's our job, is to function together as a singular unit. That's why Ephesians chapter 2 verses 20 through 22 talk about us as being established on a single foundation of apostles and prophets, also called apostles and elders in Acts chapter 15. There's also witness in Acts chapter 21. And we're supposed to be seeking to establish first and foremost the kingdom. And actually, it's a constitutional princeship. We talk about that in the Torah government study. But there's a lot of people who just don't want to hear that, especially a lot of Ephraimites. They're not interested in doing what Scripture says because it's simply not convenient. It costs time, it costs money, it requires responsibility, it requires maturity. The people don't want to do that. The people want to do every man for himself, each one doing what seems good and right in his own eyes. So then we end up with a situation like we have today, where it's basically chaos everywhere. Okay, so but if you are part of the priesthood, or if you want to know which priesthood to follow, this is what is supposed to happen: is that on or before the new moon, okay, on or before the new moon day, on or before Rosh Chodesh, okay, the priesthood needs to be asking itself, do you have any witnesses presenting or showing you or bringing to your attention at least one full sheaf of Aviv, and we're defining that as medium dough barley, or is it clear that there will be a sheaf of Aviv or medium dough barley for the day of the wave sheaf offering, Yom Hanafat HaOmer? Now, bear in mind, the wave sheaf offering, Yom Hanafat HaOmer, has to take place 15 to 21 days after the beginning of the month. Now, barley ripens very quickly. You need an expert witness and to be able to tell, is the barley going to be ripe or not in some years? In some years, it's a very marginal call. You want to have at least one, ideally at least two or three educated witnesses. We'll just say the only one that we know of at the moment that we consider qualified is Becca Bitterman. She's messianic. She's got us blocked. She doesn't like it when we try to tell her what the rules are in Scripture. So she just plain cut us off from all communication. That happened last year. We can talk about that some other time. However, she's extremely knowledgeable. She basically, I mean, the barley is her thing. She calls herself, she has what she calls the 7 species calendar. We'll talk about that in a little while. Uh, she's got the right idea. We wonder if she has the right specifics. It'd be wonderful to talk with her about that. We'd ask you please to pray for that. But right now, she has us blocked. She doesn't like the fact that we tell her that she can't do that. So she has her own rules for retroactive publication and retroactive declaration. And we told her that's not good, and so she cut us off. So we just leave it there for now. But the Pesach happens 14 days after the new moon. The wave sheaf offering can happen anywhere from 15 to 21 days after the new moon. Now, you must have that barley. That barley must be there in order to fulfill the wave sheaf offering. And if you don't have that barley and you go ahead and declare the new year, uh, which we'll see, there's another barley witness on his way to Israel right now, and that's his plan, is to declare the Aviv, or he has already declared the Aviv, and now he's going to go inspect the barley. So that just doesn't work. That's not right. And a lot of these leaders and teachers, he's not responding to my questions either. So a lot of these leaders and teachers, they're letting, well, be careful what I say, but a lot of people are letting their pride get in the way of proper service to Yahweh. Let's just put it that way. Okay. So 15 to 21 days later, you've got to have the Aviv barley, or you don't declare the month. Okay. If you don't have Aviv barley or won't have Aviv barley to present in time for the wave sheaf offering, that's not your month. Okay. So it's also not fair to retroactively declare for reasons that we're going to see here in just a moment. Okay. So what reasons? Okay. What's the big deal? Okay. Well, one thing we need to know is if you're new to the channel or if you haven't read the Torah Calendar study, in Shemot or Exodus chapter 12, starting in verse 2. So Orthodox Judah starts their new year at the end of summer, start of winter. Okay, in the seventh month, that's when they declare their new year. And well, of course, that's 180 degrees out from what Yahweh says to do. Okay, well, it's not surprising. The Talmud pretty much is 180 degrees out from what Yahweh says to do. Okay, so there you go. We'll talk about that some other place and time. But in Shemot or Exodus chapter 12, starting in verse 2, Yahweh says, this month, speaking about the month at the end of winter, what we would call spring in the West, but that's not a scriptural term. Okay, so in the first month of the year comes at the end of winter, just before the start of summer. He says, this month shall be your beginning of months. This month is the month that shall be the first month of the year to you. And he says, speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, at the end of winter, start of summer, every man shall take for himself a lamb according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. Okay. Now, why is retroactive declaration wrong? It's wrong because you need 14 days. You have to have 14 days in order to get everything to fall out right, especially in ancient times. Okay, now just a general timeline. What would happen? Okay, if you're growing barley and your barley's coming ready, and you know the new moon is coming, you would notify the priesthood because you want clearance to be able to cut your barley. So you notify the priesthood comes to inspect, and they say, yes, it's medium dough, or it's not medium dough. The reason we choose medium dough, that actually comes from Becca Bitterman. She says in her tests and in her trials, that's the youngest the barley can be, that it will still reliably germinate and give you a full, healthy, mature plant. Okay, so in other words, it's a fairly well developed seed of barley, but it's not yet hardened. It's not yet dried out. So it's full, it's complete, but it's not dried out. Okay, that's medium dough. So then, if the priesthood says, yes, we've got medium dough, this barley will reliably, if it falls to the ground, it will sprout, kind of like Yeshua fell into the ground and then rose again. Right? If that's the case, then the priesthood will make their declaration. Now, in ancient times, even with signal fires, even with horses and runners, it's still going to take anywhere from 2 to 5 days to propagate that word throughout all the communities, all the households, so that everyone gets the message. Yes, this is the month we need to be in Jerusalem for the Pesach on the 14th of this month. Okay, so now the people need time to get ready and to come up. Okay, if you're going to convert something into money for the trip, you need to sell it and convert it to money. You need to pack your bags. You need to prepare your animals. You need to prepare the homestead. So, in case you have anyone staying behind, let's say you have, for whatever reason, women or children are going to stay behind, or elderly are going to stay behind. Someone's got to stay there to take care of them. For whatever reason, you need time to do all that. Okay, then the people need an additional, depending on where you live, you need between 1 and 6, or maybe even 7 or more days to make the journey, longer if you're older. And one way or another, whether you bring a lamb with you or whether you buy a lamb once you get there, you have to take a lamb on the 10th, as we just saw. Okay, all these things take time, especially in an ancient environment. It's very ironic. We have some of the barley searchers talk about how their calendar systems are in keeping with the ancient paths of Israel. And yet, when you talk with them about what their plans are, they say, "Oh, no problem. I live in the land of Israel. I can just jump in the car and I can be in Jerusalem in a matter of hours. So that's why it's okay for me to retroactively declare the month up to the 10th day of the month." Okay, well, I suppose that's great if you live in the land of Israel and you can just grab a lamb and jump in the car, jump in the truck, or whatever you do and drive to Jerusalem. But if you live outside the land of Israel, you need more time than that. If it was ancient times and you live in one of the outskirts, one of the extremity areas of Israel, you need more time than that. Okay, so even today with modern airplanes, okay, most people they need 2 weeks. They give 2 weeks notice on their job. So, you can't just quit your job to go to the Pesach every year. It's just not a practical, feasible kind of a thing. So you have to give your employer proper notice, and you have to buy plane tickets and get hotel reservations, and even so, then packing your bags, flying to Israel, going through customs, getting to your hotel, getting set up, and then taking a lamb so you can be there at the Temple Mount on the 14th. All these things take time. So it's really not fair. And some of the barley witnesses, they own their own businesses or they used to have businesses, they have money. So they're in control of their own schedule. That's really the main point. So whether you're a stay at home housewife, you can control your own schedule, or whether you used to own your own business and you've got money and you can control your own schedule, not everyone can control their own schedule. And in ancient times, people just plain need more time than that. Okay, enough said. Here's a letter we got from one brother. He's written us before about this. So we get letters very similar to this all the time. So he says, "Dear Norman, I feel sometimes absolutely frustrated and saddened when Pesach arrives." And really, how terribly sad that is when you consider this is supposed to be a festive, joyous time of year. And he says, "My best friend is off to Israel on February the 22nd, which is actually 2 days from now. That's that's the second day of the week. Uh, So my best friend will be going to Israel on the 22nd. So we're now on the second day of the month. So his best friend is going to go to Israel on the fourth day of the month with a group of friends to inspect the barley harvest. Okay. They have had information of some budding barley a week ago. Not sure, but it may be what Becca mentioned in the Jezreel Valley. We'll talk about Becca's Jezreel sightings in a little while here. But actually, I spoke with the barley team leader. I told him I would keep the conversation private. I volunteered that I would keep the conversation private, so I'm not going to use his name. He's going to publish all this information, so you'll know who it is when he makes this publication. But no, it's a different patch. This particular barley leader is talking about things down in the Jordan River Valley and in the Gaza, whereas Becca's up in the Jezreel. She was inspecting in the Jezreel Valley. We'll talk about that recently. So they've had some information of budding barley a week ago. So now they're planning on getting on a plane and coming to Israel on the fourth day of the month, and they plan to retroactively declare. They plan to inspect all the way up to the day of the wave sheaf offering. And if they find Aviv barley, then retroactively declare. And they did this last year. He says, as they are in a group that last year declared the new year after the fact. And you may know who this is. Again, it's common knowledge who this is, but I said I wouldn't say anything, so I'm just going to keep my word on that. He says, I warned this ministry that they cannot do this. Good job, brother. You just have to serve your function as a watchman. Okay. I also tell ministry leaders what scripture says they can and cannot do, and I end up being blocked by many of them. They don't respond to me anymore. Okay, well, that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to fulfill my service as a watchman. And if someone is so arrogant that they can't listen to what scripture has to say, that's on them. The main thing is to continue to pray for them and to love them regardless of their behavior. And don't let it get under your skin like I let things get under my skin last year. Okay. So We'll talk about the pump house in some other time. So he continues, he says, so, so my friend has declared Rosh HaShanah. My friend has declared the head of the year yesterday in the hopes that they find Aviv Barley Firstfruits. Okay, so he's breaking all the rules there. Okay, you're supposed to wait until you see the barley, because when you declare the year and then you go up, if you don't have the barley, okay, that's a commanded offering. You're gonna you're gonna start the calendar year and then you don't have the commanded offering. That's very, very bad. Okay, so it says if they don't have Aviv barley, he's going to declare that they really tried but couldn't find any, and then rename this month their 13th month. And that's exactly what you're not supposed to do. Okay, had this group gone up to Israel 3 days ago and seen what would become Aviv barley, this would have been perfectly legitimate. Okay, if it was a qualified witness and he knows what he's doing, he knows how to tell when barley's going to end up being Aviv or not Aviv. He knows barley well enough for whatever reason. He's a barley farmer. He's got a lot of experience as a witness. If he knows this barley is going to advance to become medium dough, then you can at least understand how he would come up with a declaration of Aviv. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is he's declaring the Aviv, and then he's flying to Israel in hopes he will find Aviv barley. In this particular case, he might find Aviv barley, but the question is, will he find first fruits of the wheat in order for Shavuot 50 days later or 7 weeks later, depending upon your take? So the writer continues. He says, "In my view, the only viable solution for the future is that there will have to be better inspections of the barley." Amen. Amen. I absolutely agree. And this is why it would be so wonderful if we could get everyone to put down their egos at the door and we could get all the people together to agree on what the barley standards are. In other words, that's how they did things in Acts chapter 15 is they got together to talk out what are the requirements, and they didn't just break contact. They didn't just break fellowship. And this is one of the big differences in between Judah and Ephraim. Okay, in Judah understands Judah has to hang together or they will all hang separately, so to speak. So Judah understands they're a nation. They've got to have a way to do things, right, wrong, or indifferent. There's the right way, there's the wrong way, and then there's the way Judah does things. But at least they all hang together. They have the discipline to hang together. Whereas on the Ephraimite side of the house, what you've got is you've got a bunch of people that everyone's just going to do what seems good and right in their own eyes, and they don't necessarily listen even. And the vast majority of us don't have the discipline to do what is right. If it costs time or money or discipline, or you have to have order or organization, we're out. So that's Ephraim for you, at least at the moment, until after Armageddon. So what we really need here is we need more responsible and communicative barley witnesses, people who will follow a Matthew 18 process because they understand that there is supposed to be such a thing as a legitimate body. You don't just have a bunch of individuals running around in the Wild West, which is what the House of Ephraim has today. Okay. So I wrote to the ministry leader who plans to declare the barley early, and so he says, well, yeah, I said I wouldn't repeat, but my questions to him were, okay, if you're going to go, he said that he's going to inspect the barley right up to the day of the wave sheaf offering. And if he finds Aviv barley, even on the day of the wave sheaf offering, he's going to retroactively declare the month of the Aviv, which is exactly what you're not supposed to do. So my questions to him were, this is a paraphrase, if you retroactively declare the Aviv right up to the day of the wave sheaf offering, how can you go back and take a lamb on the 10th of the month? You can't. So I believe someone said what they're planning on doing is they're planning on keeping the Pesach preemptively or whatever, however, prophylactically, I suppose. Uh, Mercy. Uh, so they're going to keep the Pesach in the hopes that they find Aviv barley on the 15th, which they might, or on the day of the wave sheaf. I think if I have to look it up, it's like 17 days or 17 or 18 days delay this year. They might find Aviv barley, but the question is, are they going to find the black Israeli native emmer wheat 50 days after that? That's a big question. Okay, so we'll talk about that further in the presentation. And also, the command is to keep the Pesach in its time. Okay, how can you keep the Pesach in its time? How can you know that's when you're supposed to keep the Pesach? And in ancient times, if you tell people this is the Pesach and the people start to gather and they get all their things together and they walk up to Jerusalem, it takes like a week or more, depending upon the circumstances, and it's not the right time, what does that do? We'll talk about that in just a little bit, in just a moment. And what are we doing here? Are we Elohim that we get to make that determination? Okay, now this is just a simple screen grab from Google Maps. So here you have Eilat in the south, and then a blue line, blue squiggly line, going up to Jerusalem. Okay, so uh, the short route, if you go along the Jordan River Valley, so if the short route, it takes you 69 hours for a healthy adult in good physical shape to walk that route. Okay, longer if you're elderly, longer if you're injured, longer if you're young. And I don't know, they didn't have an option for how long does it take to drive sheep, but you can't drive sheep that far. And I don't know if sheep necessarily go that fast. I think sheep have to travel much slower than that. Okay, well, and then it's 72 hours if you take the long route. Okay, so now if you were to walk 10 hours a day, that would take you more than 7 days to make that journey. Alrighty, so now if you're exceptionally fit and strong and you can walk for 12 hours a day, how many days is that going to take you? 72-hour route's going to take you at least 6 days. Okay, well, if how do you how do you how do you propose for people to make that journey? We have one of the barley witnesses. She's declaring the she last year she went to delay and she went to declare the Aviv barley on the 10th. In other words, she was going to tell you, were you in the month of the Aviv or were you in 2nd December until the 10th of the month? Okay, well, what are the rest of the people supposed to do with that? So here we have some lamb dilemma scenarios. Okay, so you're supposed to choose your lamb on the 10th and then leave home and start walking to Jerusalem, which takes 2 to 6 days or more. Okay, if you leave home on the 10th because your barley witness says you don't need to declare the month until the 10th, okay, you might not even arrive in Jerusalem in time for the Pesach on the 14th. So you're late already. Because why? Because you don't have 2 weeks full notice. Alternately, you can drive your lamb hard and probably kill it. Yahweh forbid. Okay, so here we have a second scenario. Rather than bringing your lamb with you, you can at least hypothetically go up to Jerusalem early and buy yourself a lamb there in Jerusalem on the 10th. Okay, so you'd have to leave early. Okay, well, how can you do that if your barley witness doesn't even tell you if it's the month of the Aviv until the 10th? How can you do that in ancient times? Okay, so just imagine you have to leave early. You're going to leave home in Eilat or in the south or Dan in the north or wherever it is that you're coming from. You're going to have to travel. You have to walk for a week or whatever it takes you to get there. And then you arrive on the 10th. And now your barley witness says, oh, no, sorry. Oh, no, there's no Aviv barley this month. Come back next month. And the problem is you've already spent your second tithe to go up to Jerusalem, and now your time is already gone. So how can you come up the next month? So what we have is we have some people being very irresponsible with their requirements as barley witnesses, pretending that they're in the priesthood role and they don't even know what the priesthood role, what they don't know what the priesthood function is supposed to do. Okay, now, this exact scenario would have happened last year with one of the barley witnesses who insists on being able to retroactively declare the Aviv. Okay, so she was going to look for Aviv barley up until the 10th of the month, and then she was going to declare it because why? Because she lives in the land of Israel, and all she has to do is jump in the car and drive to Jerusalem. Takes her a few hours. Okay, and ironically, her ministry tagline has to do with what you would do in ancient times, and what she's suggesting would not work in ancient times. Okay. So now, just to give my map is a little bit clipped there, but with this concept of 2nd December, now this is the way things would go this month. Okay, this is the Western Roman Gregorian calendar, just so people can relate to it. Now, we just had this being recorded on the 20th. You'll probably be able to see it on the night of the 20th or the 21st on Shabbat. So, yesterday was Rosh Chodesh. So, the Chodesh was seen the night of the 18th, and then the main day was on the 19th. And here we are on the 20th recording. Okay, so the Chodesh or Rosh Chodesh on the 19th. So you count an additional 10 days. So one, the green being the first day. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The 10th day falls out on Shabbat. Okay, now, the one barley witness, she would say, okay, so last year she was going to do this. She was going to retroactively declare on the 10th of the month, didn't find the barley, hasn't said anything about her policy changing. Okay, so then you'd have literally, well, depending on how long the signal takes to get to you. I mean, suppose it takes 2 days for you to get the word. You just have a couple of days. You'd have a few days to get your things together and get up to Jerusalem. How would you do that? If you happen to have a horse, maybe you could do that. But other than that, how could you do that? You couldn't. Okay. And now the other barley witness who says he has every plan in the world of declaring the Aviv, COC, he's going to, no matter what happens, he's going to declare the Aviv. He's going to keep looking right up to the day of the wave sheaf offering, or right up to the day of the Omer, okay, which would happen to be on the 8th of March, had this been in this particular scenario. Okay, well, if you're going to do that, again, how did you take your lamb on the 10th? And how did you celebrate the Pesach on the 14th? And moreover, why would you think that's okay? Do you think you're Elohim that you get to play with time like that? Are you going to make the sun move back in the sky? Like, just it boggles the mind. So I had, well, anyway, we'll leave that story for later. But I mean, I had one person present me with this scenario, and I was just flabbergasted. I didn't know what to say. So Becca Bitterman, this is what happened last year. Is Becker Bitterman told me that my logic and my reasoning was absolutely unbiblical, absolutely non-scriptural, and that I couldn't give her a good biblical reason why she's not allowed to retroactively declare the Aviv. I couldn't think of what to say in the moment. And then I spluttered and she just cut me off. She's just like, you can't give me a good biblical reason. Don't call me. Don't text me. Don't email me. No letters, no YouTube comments, no instant messenger, no Facebook, nothing. She just completely blocked us. So we can talk more about what the true reasons were for this. But basically, she didn't want to hear what the scriptural or the reality requirements are regarding this. And especially, it was very disappointing because we had gone way out of our way to be good to Ms. Bitterman, Sister Bitterman. We bought her equipment. We set her up with graphics. We helped her get an email account. I can't remember if we helped her with a Patreon account or if she figured that one out on her own. I think she figured that out on her own. But we tried to tell her how to do things. We tried to help her get started, and she treats you like that. So we gave her money. We bought her equipment, all sorts of stuff, and just bang. So she just cut us off because this is Ephraim. I think she might even self-identify as Jewish. I don't know. But so this is just indicative of the kind of thing. So what is needed, according to the brother's letter that he's writing, what is needed is for everyone to check their egos at the door and to come together and talk about what are these scriptural biblical requirements. So Sister Bitterman, she's messianic. She believes that in her words, we're under the order of Melchizedek now. So that's why it's okay to have women ministers. That's why head coverings are no longer required. That's why organization is no longer required. That's why uh, she has some teachings that basically out with the old, in with the new. For us, it's like, well, why are you in the Hebrew roots movement if you believe out with the old, in with the new? And that's another subject of debate or discussion is that this is what I keep saying is there's so many messianics who are basically still effectively red horse at heart. Okay, they believe that Yeshua came to deliver something new. They don't believe Yeshua came to deliver a course correction, that the rabbis were off base, and Yeshua said, no, 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 we need to go back to the original Levitical system. Okay, that's what Nazarene Israel teaches. The rabbis took off in this direction with the Talmud, and Yeshua says, no Talmud, come back to Tanakh. And what's happened is that people will use Shaul's teachings to say, no, Yeshua came to teach something completely new, not a course correction, not to bring us back to the Tanakh, but to take us off in another direction. So you have the rabbis taking off in a Talmudic direction, and you have very many messianics and very many leaders and teachers taking off in what you might call a Pauline direction. So, and Miss Bitterman's not the only one. So we would like to ask you, please, to pray for her that she will realize that Yeshua did not come to teach something new. And if we're going to use the words of Paul to do away with the words of Yeshua in Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 through 20, then we need to seriously consider, why are we in Hebrew roots? Okay, why are we talking about restoring ancient pathways? Okay, just matters for consideration, matters for prayer. Okay, we haven't yet talked about Devorah Gordon. We haven't yet talked about Brian Convery. We haven't yet talked about equinox theory. We haven't talked about people who observe the rotation of the sun, the moon, and the stars. We all have our faults. We all have our flaws. We all have our failings. We want to honor everyone for their intention to serve Yahweh Elohim. But we need, I believe, all to be extremely careful. One, to follow the words of Yahweh, and two, not to use the words of mortal human beings, whether they be rabbis or ex-rabbis, such in the case of Shaliach Shaul, to do away with the words of Elohim. And when you've got a conflict between the words of Elohim and the words of a mortal human man, the words of Elohim had better win out every single time. Okay, enough said. Yeah. Now, in the same vein, I need to say this is a reversal for me personally. This is a reversal for us in Nazarene Israel. Okay, so we all need to be able to say, whoop, I used to believe that. I no longer believe that. So I used to be against intercalation. And I'll tell you why. So I used to teach that the very first sheaf of barley was the one to begin the harvest. And the reason why I taught that is because of Deuteronomy 16 and verse 9. And So basically, what you don't want happening, Deuteronomy 16 and verse 9 says effectively that you begin the count up to Shavuot when you begin to cut the grain. When you put the sickle to the standing grain, that's when you begin your count. Okay, well, that's true. You do that, but there's a wrinkle in that. So what we're talking about is the start of the actual main body of the harvest, not any, what would you call it? Any freakishly early sheaves or any freakishly early fields. Okay, and so we'll talk about how this works out. So these early sheaves, these freakishly early, early flush sheaves of barley, they do not start the formal harvest because you need to have wheat for the offering at Shavuot. And if you don't have that wheat for the offering at Shavuot, then you can't offer that commanded offering. So again, you're in violation of what Yahweh has commanded. So we're going to modify this. We're going to rewrite the Torah calendar study because again, it's not important that we be right. What's most important is that we teach what is right. So we are willing to make changes where changes are necessary, where changes are due. We simply ask that these other leaders and teachers do the same thing. Okay. You say, well, what about that barley? What about the black emmer wheat? So here's the command in Shemot or Exodus chapter 34 and verse 22, where it says, Yahweh says, you shall observe Shavuot or the Feast of Weeks of the first fruits of the wheat harvest. And that's the black Israeli native emmer wheat. And then also observe the Feast of Ingathering at the year's end. Okay, so you've got to have a wave sheaf for the barley for the day of Yom Hanafat HaOmer. Don't miss it. You've also got to have a sheaf of the first fruits of the Israeli native black emmer wheat for Pentecost or Shavuot. So what this means is you can't start the year too early. So you say, well, what do you mean starting the year too early? Okay, so now we want to give credit where credit is due. We believe that Ms. Bitterman is the foremost knowledgeable person with regards to the species that we know of, at least. Maybe there's some professor somewhere that knows more, but she basically lives this. This is what she does. This is her life. She tries to stay in tune with the barley, in tune with the seasons, in tune with the wheat, in tune with what she calls the 7 species. We'll talk about that. Now, this is a video on her channel, Ancient Path New Moon. So she published this on November the 23rd, 2025, and she found what we would call a freakishly early or an what would you say, anomalistic? Then she found an anomaly patch of barley. And she says it was basically almost ripe. It just needed one more good rain for it to come ripe. And they did, in fact, get one more good rain. Now, she stopped reporting on this patch. And we would have written her to ask her about it, except she said no contact, no emails, no phone calls, no text, no anything. Obviously, we have to teach on what the truth is, whether she's happy about it or not. It's our job to teach, even when people are unhappy with us. So she found this on November the 23rd. I believe that was just after the Hodesh. So that would have meant that the December new moon would have been hypothetically the start of the year. So you'd be looking at I'd have to look it up, but either a late December or I think probably like an early January Pesach. And that's just not feasible. That's not practical. You're not going to have first fruits of emmer wheat on that date. Okay, now also, she had just a few days ago, 4 days ago, she found wild barley in the Jezreel Valley, and it meets all the qualifications. It's not artificially, well, we'll talk about that in just a moment. I think I've got that slide in there. Anyway, it's a natural field. It's not by a roadside. It's not by artificial building structures. It's not near power lines. There's nothing that's influencing the barley to ripen prematurely, let's say. So, in other words, it's just a completely natural field. It's got green on the left and green on the right. There's no roads, no buildings, no power lines, nothing artificial to artificially heat things up or to create what some people call a greenhouse effect or a hothouse effect, or just make it hotter or make things ripen sooner. It had nothing like that. Now, to her credit, she chose not to declare that barley. Okay, so now here, this is our barley witness. Uh, in spite of our disagreements, we acknowledge her as the foremost knowledgeable person that we know. So this is published on the 18th of February. She says, according to the witness of the seven species, we'll talk about those in just a second, which are the seven first fruits offerings that were given in the temple, this is the 12th biblical month. Okay, so we believe that she did right with that, even though she found what, and I can't get close enough to it to inspect that. I've grown barley several times. I'm familiar with barley. I know what's what, kind of in the sense that I don't do my own car work anymore, but I've done enough car work in my life that I know when I find a good mechanic. So I know when this mechanic is straight with me and he's telling me the real deal versus a mechanic who's trying to cheat me or rip me off or doesn't know what he's doing. Uh, I've done enough with barley to know that Becca Bitterman knows what she's talking about. And so, yeah. So, our only issue with this, our only issue is that her use of the term seven species is from the Mishnah being the core document of the Talmud. However, we do believe that she is right about intercalation, meaning she did not declare the new year based on the November early flush of barley, and she also did not declare the year based on the first flush of barley from 4 days ago. So that was good on her part. So we're doing a reversal on that. Now, Brian Convery, who's another barley witness, he also teaches intercalation, but he teaches intercalation. We disagree completely with all of his criterion. We disagree completely with his definition of Aviv barley. And he also teaches intercalation based upon the equilux, which was related to the equinox. So again, we're back to worrying about the motions of the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the celestial bodies, and this kind of a thing, which is effectively prohibited. Yahweh considers that to be the worship of the sun, the moon, and the stars. So we would love to talk with Sister Bitterman about this, except she has us blocked, has told us not to contact her. So we have not contacted her. We'd like to ask you to pray with us that she will contact us with a open and soft and loving heart. So you look up seven species on Wikipedia, and what you find is the seven species listed are wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and they also list dates because they mention honey in Deuteronomy or Devarim 8 and verse 8, except many people believe that that's date honey as opposed to bee honey. And just a quick comment, because I know we'll get questions on that. We believe that bee honey is kosher. Samson ate bee honey. There is such a, it's the land of milk and honey. There's a big debate. So milk is milk. We know what milk is, but is the honey bee honey or is it date honey? We're going to sidestep that question. We believe that both of them are clean, both of them are kosher for eating. In this particular circumstance, they're probably talking about date honey. Now, the only issue that we have with the concept of seven species, we don't have an issue with the concept of intercalation. We do have an issue with the concept of, quote, seven species, quote unquote, because it says many reference to these basic foods can be found in the Bible. The Mishnah, which is the core document of the Talmud, states that the only first fruits of the seven species could be brought to the temple in Jerusalem as offerings. Okay, so we don't really care what the Mishnah has to say. Uh, the Mishnah, again, we're back to the words of men. And if you're going to use the words of men to either add to or replace the words of Yahweh Elohim in the Bible, we believe you've got a problem. Okay. But what we are saying is that we're looking for a solution to this. We're almost out of time. We're going to have to stop this recording and then come back to it later. But obviously, clearly, we saw the command that the first fruits of the black emmer wheat are a commanded offering, and you do have to have those 50 days later. So if you're going to declare the new year based on some freakishly or anomalistically, if that's a word, barley that arrives in November, or if it's too early in February, it's just not going to work. You're not going to have black emmer wheat, first fruits of black emmer wheat in time for Shavuot. So we want to give credit to Ms. Bitterman. She's got a system for tracking the year. She's got a system for lining things up. We believe that her system is correct in the main, even in spite of the wrong treatment, uh, basically rotten treatment, evil treatment that she's given us. She's used us and abused us and then lost us. Even in spite of all of that, we believe that she has, in the main, a correct system. We're going to take a small quibble with her use of the term 7 species, but we believe that her plan for intercalation is the correct one. She's got some good videos out there. She has one on, I meant to include the slide. She's got a correct video out there regarding, see, she published it like 8 days ago at the time of this recording. So it would be, anyway, she talks about the 3D environment or a 3D something like that. In any case, she talks about why she disqualifies the barley around the pump house. And basically, it's because you have two roads that run parallel to each other. Roads are huge heat collectors, especially in the Middle East. They catch all the sun. You got blacktop or pavement, and it just soaks up the sun, and then it basically radiates heat all night. And this artificially ripens the barley early. And so this area around the pump house, or the southern Jordan crossing checkpoint, people like to use it all the time for roadside barley, wave sheaves, and it's just not legitimate. So we are about out of time. Again, so we want to give credit where credit is due. We believe that Becca Bitterman and Brian Convery, who we haven't talked about much, they are right about the need to intercalate, in other words, lining up the year. Now, if you have barley that lines up earlier than that, I hate to say this, this hurts. What it says in the Talmud is you just cut that barley and lay it aside. Now, we disagree with the Talmud in many other respects. You'll have to wait for the rest of the teaching because we have to cut this. I have to send it to my editor. Uh, so yeah. So if Miss Bitterman had hypothetically declared the first wave sheaf of barley on November the 23rd, which thankfully she did not, or if she had hypothetically declared the first sheaf of barley she saw on the 16th of February, 4 days ago, it's questionable. Well, in the November, there would not have been first fruits of wheat for Shavuot. And with the barley from 4 days ago, it's questionable if there would be wheat for Shavuot 50 days from now. And we have another barley witness who is headed to Israel, probably will want to use that barley in the Jordan River Valley, roadside barley. It would not be ripe in ancient times because in ancient times you would not have two large heat sinks called paved roads in that valley, and so that barley would not have been ripe in ancient times. And the idea is, what is the weather that Yahweh is sending? Okay, so I hope I've made all that clear. Hopefully, it's clear to you why intercalation is necessary. Hopefully, it's clear to you why the term 7 species is questionable, is because it comes from the Mishnah. But the concept of intercalation is necessary because of the need to have the first fruits of wheat for Shavuot. And hopefully, you understand now why retroactive declarations of the Aviv barley is not a correct concept. And I would like to ask you all, please, for your prayers. I know I've named names in this video. I know I've I've described persons who are probably going to be very obvious to identify once they make their own declarations. We've got other witnesses again, Brian Convery, Devorah Gordon. We haven't mentioned them yet. We've got other videos why we disagree with their works. We would love to see a reconciliation. We would love to see what the writer spoke about is better coordination regarding the barley harvests. And what that's going to take is a lot of prayers for a lot of maturity on the parts of all parties concerned, so that people not use and lose other people, so that people not take delight in the annual barley wars beginning, but rather I ask you please to pray with me that we'll get sincere and genuine, humble and open-hearted dialogue, so that we can give Judah an example of what it is to be filled with Yeshua's spirit. Because right now, I can't imagine Judah looking at the barley wars that we have every year and saying, you know what? We will know that they are Notzrim by their love, because that's not the example that's being given. The example that's being given is we've got the wild, wild west out here, and every man is out for him. Every man and every woman is out for themselves, and people not following Yeshua's instructions, people not doing what the Torah says, people making up their own rules and not being responsible or responsive to anyone else. And that doesn't work. That's not the concept that is needed. And in the Torah, if you're going to witness to Judah, you've got to have a priesthood of some kind, and you've got to have witnesses that agree with each other. So please pray with me that whether sooner or whether later, Yahweh and his spirit are going to prevail. So thank you very much for watching this presentation. Uh, Basically, I'm out of time. I wish I had more time to rehearse and polish the presentation. I apologize if anything was said incorrectly. Hopefully, we can do a better job when we give you a more complete video, and hopefully, we can do a better job when we rewrite the Torah calendar study. But I wanted to get this information out there. I needed to get it out there because we have one barley witness on the way to the land. They're planning on declaring the month early, no matter what. So if you want to know why the pump house is not a good area to declare, please look at Becca Bitterman's YouTube page in search of his ancient path and look for the video of about 8 days ago. So it'd be about the 12th of February. And she talks about a 3D experience, and she goes into very good detail as to why that area is disqualified. So thank you again, and Shabbat Shalom. May Yahweh be with us all. And may he please bring us together in true unity, in spirit and in truth, in his way and in his perfect time. We ask these things in Yeshua's name, that we might become better servants for Yeshua, our Messiah and King.